culture podcast. My name's Oliver Brady, and with me this week is Dr. Sarah Ifft Decker.
I'm the guest this week.
Listen, I wasn't going to talk about it, but I'm going to bring it up. This is my last episode as co-host of the podcast, and I just felt like I should take over and make it my podcast for the only time that it's going to be my podcast. I'm quitting in some sort of protest. I'm not doing it. I just my life has just gotten so busy that I don't have time to podcast at the minute. So I'm going to take an extended hiatus.
I thought it was protest from the fact that use Prime Noctis wasn't a real thing.
No, that's not, because it is a real thing, Sarah. That's why it has a name. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I'm Oliver Brady. Sarah Ifft Decker is a medieval scientist type person. See, look at this. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. I'm just going to go sit in a car. Sarah, please introduce yourself, because I am obviously doing a terrible job of it.
I'm Sarah Ifft Decker, and I am a medieval scientist, otherwise known as a historian.
That's what they're called.
That's what they call us at the universities.
Historian.
And on this podcast, we look at how movies, TV, and books depict the medieval world, and we talk about what they get right, what they get wrong, and what they tell us about how modern people think about the medieval past.
And I, in my daily life, am a science-torian, and that means
a physisorian.
A physisorian. So I do stuff with sciences and all that sort of shenanigans. Sarah, why did you decide to do this podcast?
I wanted to do this podcast because I'm professionally a medieval historian. I teach medieval history, and my students often come in with ideas about the Middle Ages that are not quite right. And they often get those from medieval movies. So I wanted to do this podcast to talk about, where those kind of ideas are coming from. And why have you been my co-host these last few months on this podcast?
Because I love the medieval period. I love the Middle Ages. I love the Dark Ages, even though I know it annoys Sarah when I call it that. I grew up reading fantasy. I grew up watching fantasy. And most of those are set in the medieval period. So then as I got older, I wanted to see more historically accurate stuff. And I've been learning that I haven't really been watching anything that's been particularly historically accurate. So yeah, it's just great to be able to sit down, and it's been a fantastic experience sitting with Sarah and having her just go like, yeah, that wasn't a thing, and this wasn't a thing. Even on the rare occasions when she gets it wrong, like that time she said that Prima Nocta wasn't a thing. But anyway, Sarah, what do you think is the biggest mistake that your students have made, beyond being men?
That's only in the one class. I would say
that's not even a joke, everybody. Sarah does teach a course. I'm not sure what she calls it, but it might as well be called Men. Fuck you guys.
It's called Women in the Bible, and it's not my fault that the class is 20-something women and 2 men, and the women are often very angry. Okay, maybe I encourage them.
Uncomfortable men. That's how I like to think of it. So what is the biggest mistake?
I would say one of the biggest mistakes tends to be assuming that basically just the Middle Ages was this complete lawless time where everyone just ran around and murdered each other constantly. Whereas, in fact, the Middle Ages had laws. Several of them. In fact, they had 2 completely separate legal systems that both existed and both tried to institute law and order and often succeeded.
Right. Now, this is something that we've not actually come across in any of our movies. How do you mean there were 2 separate legal systems?
Well, that there was the law associated with what we might call the state. So laws that are passed by the king, as well as by local, for example, urban municipal governments or local lords. But then also there was canon law, which will come up a little bit later today. But that is the legal system, the very kind of complex legal bureaucracy and legislative system of the church.
You see, my problem there is that I grew up in Ireland during the 80s and 90s, so canon law and state law are basically the same thing to somebody my age, and if you're my mum and dad's age, 100% the same thing. So it's just weird, but
which is weird because they actually were not quite the same in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, we regressed as we developed as a country. Sarah, we should probably talk about the movie that we're actually going to do today. So, we picked a doozy from my last official co-hosting. It is Robin Hood from 2018, and
this is a movie.
My God, this is certainly a movie that got made.
That is exactly how I would describe it. It is a movie that, for some reason, they decided to shepherd into the world. They also decided that it should star Taron Egerton, a sandy-haired white man who looks exactly like Ansel Elgort and Alden Ehrenreich, and I will never be able to tell them apart.
He looks like them. Boy sounds like this. Oh, I'm a ward boy. Oh, Taron Egerton. Oh, I'm Eggsy. Stop it. Yeah. I'm a geezer. I'm a little bit this. I'm a little bit that. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I'm going to sell you some stuff down the market. Because he is a Cockney of some description. He's the main star of the Kingsman series.
Yes, there's a lot of diversity of accents in this movie.
Yes, there is.
Jamie Foxx is playing Little John. Was he just being American?
Jamie Foxx?
Yeah.
I don't know. Right. Have you ever seen Horrible Bosses?
No.
Oh, well, Jamie Foxx is in Horrible Bosses, and he's basically doing the accent he does in Horrible Bosses.
He's American, right?
He's American, yeah.
And
it's just a weird little accent. It's like he tries a little bit every now and then to put a little bit of a Eastern kind of hint of Easternness to his voice.
Yeah, but it's very half-hearted.
Yeah, it's not good. We've also got Ben Mendelsohn, Mendo, who is in everything. It's like this happens every now and then. Christoph Waltz is another good example of this, where to me an actor comes out of nowhere and then suddenly is in every movie for about 3 years.
Yeah.
Then disappears and then comes back and then does like another 3-year period where he's in every movie, and that's Ben Mendelsohn. It's like I don't remember seeing him up until about 2 years ago, and now you can't turn on a movie without him being in it somewhere. So
the first thing, at least, that I saw him in was Rogue One as Director Krennic, and I'm pretty sure he is playing the exact same role and is wearing the exact same outfit.
It is surprisingly weird how close his outfits meet to the stuff he wears in Rogue One.
Like, who made that decision and why?
I don't know. There must be some sort of copy on here. He's also in the latest Captain Marvel movie. The Captain Marvel movie.
The Captain Marvel movie.
Out as we were talking about. Now I know I've seen Captain Marvel. Sarah, have you seen Captain Marvel?
No, I still haven't seen Captain Marvel.
Oh, well, I don't want to spoil it, but it's good.
Okay, I'm gonna go see it. Yeah, because I spent all of this week complaining about how they killed off most of the women and people of color in the Avengers movies. So I might as well at least see the one woman-led Marvel movie.
Yeah, well, it'll just be a chance. Now that all of those women and people of color are out of the way, now it'll be a chance for us white guys to come to the fore. Like,
finally, you have representation.
Before. Finally, like, I mean, we need more Chris Hemsworth, so there's people who look and sound exactly like me on screen.
There's Taron Egerton.
Then we got Eve Hewson. Krennic. Ben Mendelsohn plays the Sheriff of Nottingham. Eve Hewson plays Maid Marian, and I looked her up and I was like, she looks really familiar. And I was like, wait, Hewson? She's Irish? No. Yeah, turns out this is Bono's daughter.
I assume that's why she looked familiar, because I have not seen her in anything or heard of anything she's been in.
No, me either, really. But yeah, Eve Hewson, she got a lot of abuse when she started going into acting, and it's hard. It's a weird thing to talk about because, like, obviously I'm a dude talking about this, but she got fat shamed a lot by the Irish.
Really?
Media. Yeah, and it's weird because she's not a stick figure, but.
I mean, yeah, because obviously fat shaming is bad regardless of size, but she is quite slender.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I'm saying. Is it's
Yeah.
not what I'm getting at is there's no reason to ever fat shame somebody, but like they were showing pictures of her, like, oh, look at her and her cellulite kind of stuff. You know, they're going, what the fuck are you talking about? It's a tiny little woman. What do you act like?
Wow.
Yeah, but I think a lot of that was just people being dicks and the fact that her dad's a billionaire, so
Yeah.
it's like, ho, let's poke fun at her. She's obviously had everything handed to her, and you're thinking, yeah, but like Kate Mara has had everything handed to her. Rooney Mara's had everything handed to them. Like,
so have most white
the
men.
Deschanel sisters. A lot of white men had to crawl themselves up from the middle classes. Don't you be saying we all had to like come from wealthy stock. Speaking of wealthy stock, we have Tim Minchin, because a lot of people don't realize he's actually from a well-to-do family. But Tim Minchin plays Friar Tuck.
Is he a comedian or something mostly?
Yeah. He's a comedian. He plays the piano and sings.
Oh, okay.
And does that sort of stand-up kind of routines. I like him. He's a funny guy.
He was fine in this role. He was far from the worst thing about this movie.
I don't know. Then we have Christian Grey, Jamie Dornan from Northern Ireland, who doesn't have to bother changing his accent to play Will Scarlet, who I think is meant to be Welsh.
Yep. Jamie Dornan pulling off his Dom jeans and pulling on his medieval slack. Never mind, I don't remember what pants are called. His pulling on his codpiece.
Spoiler alert, pulling on his Two-Face.
Yeah.
Because that's pretty much what he's doing in this movie. Like, before we get into this, so this is Robin Hood. This might as well be Batman: The Dark Knight.
It pretty much is. It's also terrible.
just like controversial for my last episode, Sarah F. Decker shitting on The Dark Knight.
No, I'm not shitting on this movie, not The Dark Knight. I love The Dark Knight.
You said it's also terrible. Then we got F. Murray Abraham, who is one of my favorite actors in the entire world, and Sarah had to tell me that he's not Jewish.
I really have
always
thought
assumed he was.
I have too, and I am Jewish, and I was like, oh yeah, one of the Jewish actors, F. Murray Abraham, one of the great Jewish actors of my people, F. Murray Abraham. Nope.
I even now, having you look it up and tell me, I'm still sitting there going, yeah, F. Murray Abraham's Jewish.
Yeah, no, I have literally my entire life thought F. Murray Abraham is Jewish, and I'm a little disappointed.
He's in a really bad yet movie I love called By the Sword, where it's the best. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. So Eric Roberts is a fencing master who is competing on the American Olympics team, and F. Murray Abraham starts cleaning up around his gym, and then we find out that in his younger days, F. Murray Abraham was one of the best swordsmen in America, and something had happened where he was disgraced and wasn't allowed to use a sword anymore, or he voluntarily stopped using a sword, and then Eric Roberts proceeds to bully him until they have a sword fight at the end. And it's like, it's not a movie that should be enjoyable. It's not a movie that's shot well, and yet I absolutely love that movie. So, By the Sword, starring Eric Roberts and F. Murray Abraham. If you watch one movie this year that you've never seen before or even heard of, By the Sword.
Yeah, so F. Murray Abraham plays Cardinal Franklin. Also, a fun fact about this movie before we get in, because related to the fact that this movie is terrible, not The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight is a good movie. This is a terrible movie. This movie was nominated for an impressive 3 Razzies for Worst Picture, Worst Supporting Actor, an honor that Jamie Foxx was fortunate enough to receive, and Worst Prequel/Remake/Ripoff. It sadly did not win any, and I feel like it was really robbed in that last category.
Yeah, because I the only reason that I can imagine that this didn't win Worst Prequel, Remake, Ripoff, or Sequel, and I haven't looked up the Razzies, but this came out in 2018.
Yeah.
So I'm going to guess The Predator.
I
Wonder
looked it up and then I
Phyllis.
forgot. And I didn't write it down and I forgot, so
I didn't look. I'm gonna look it up after we finish recording.
yeah.
But the Predator has to have one that it's fucking terrible.
I know that, I'm sure that is a contentious category, but wow, I feel like this deserved it.
Okay, so we need to start into our first segment where we're gonna break down the movie. Now, I was just finishing editing an episode today, and it was an hour and 50 minutes long. So even now, coming up to the end of my stay here, I think I'm keeping things going too long with the amount of times I procrastinate. So we're going to try and keep this shorter, but because it's a terrible movie, chances are it's going to go a little bit long. I mean, even as we're looking down, we're already been recording for 23 minutes. So I'm just going to start straight into it and go, Innumeratio. Saved it for the last one, Sarah. That was perfect.
Classic.
How does this movie begin?
I have very rarely, I think, seen the intro to a movie and immediately known that this was going to drive me insane. So,
what the fuck is this, Ollie? Woodcuts? What is this?
Yeah, so the credits are done over woodcuts, which could have been cool. But the woodcuts are clearly like 19th into early 20th century style woodcuts, which unreasonably annoyed me, especially because, so I think the Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunter movie actually does a better job of having like vaguely like early modern, at least, esque woodcuts as the background for the credits. And it's like, couldn't you have at least managed that? But yeah, but these look so modern, and I find it very annoying. But, yeah.
This is doubly annoying because the Hansel and Gretel movie stars Jeremy Renner, and nothing with Jeremy Renner should ever be better than anything.
True. But it's okay. I mean, we really don't need to worry about any of these accuracy issues, because as the movie tells us very quickly in the voiceover at the beginning, I could bore you with history, but no, forget history. Can't tell me what to do, movie.
Yeah, forget history. Like, also, Robin Hood wasn't a real person.
That too.
So we can't forget history because it's not. Oh man, I mean, this is the stuff historians have been doing this for years. But anyway, the important thing is, right? This movie starts with Maid Marian trying to steal a horse, and she gets caught by a stable boy, and then the stable boy is all like, "Oh, I'm gonna let you go. Oh, I'm also gonna push you up against the wall," in what is literally basically the beginning of a rape scene. Like, I mean, it doesn't end up that way, but that's how it starts.
Yeah, the way he is pushing her up against the wall is extremely disturbing. The whole thing looks very non-consensual, and I am really not okay with that being the lead-in to their romantic relationship.
Yeah, it's really weird, but that's what starts the relationship. He allows her to escape with the horse. She finds out that he is the lordling, which is how she describes him. Some little lord walking around, and he doesn't understand everything because she's trying to speak with an English accent and then just slips back into pure Irish every now and then. So Loxley lets her go, and then we get a brief montage of them being in love and how he becomes the lord. And I think, like, it's weird. From watching that little montage, it's implied that they're already doing robberies and stuff together. Like, they're definitely having adventures.
But I don't understand why they would be doing robberies, because at this point he's rich.
He's rich, and he's not at all an outlaw or anything. So I think that's just them trying to show that himself and Marion are both excitable characters who can do cool stuff.
Right. They're fun. But...
yeah. And then we get a draft for Vietnam.
Yep. That happened. So Robin gets drafted with a draft notice into the Crusades, which then we realize are apparently just the war in Iraq now, because Jerusalem, or I guess it's not Jerusalem, I guess it's like Accra or something, but whatever, it doesn't matter, is just like downtown Fallujah. It's ridiculous.
Right. Now, for anyone listening who hasn't seen this movie, I want you to pause right now. Now, I know loads of podcasts do this, right? But as soon as I'm finished talking, I want you to pause, watch that scene, and come back to us, because no description is going to do this justice, right? So just type in to YouTube, because it's definitely on YouTube, because I went looking for it today. Type in first battle scene Robin Hood 2018, right? This looks like a scene taken straight from, just speaking of Jeremy Renner, The Hurt Locker. Like it's shot in the same sort of palette. It's got the same sort of filters. It's got the same sort of desolation. It's got the same sort of, oh, we're walking through these broken down and clearly bombed buildings, and people could be sniping at us from anywhere at any time, including machine gun.
Right, they're things
crossbows.
that they sort of, they're like crossbows, but they're machine. Some of them are machine guns, some of them are sniper guns. They're just very much transforming medieval weaponry into modern weaponry, which I'm not going to necessarily say could never work as a deliberate anachronism, but I feel like a movie has to be better to justify it.
It's so jarring. I mean, it's one of the weird things where I was watching, I was like, I don't hate this scene. I hate the way they're doing it.
Yeah.
But the idea of them having to go through a city, as I said, I've read a lot of fancy books, a lot of medieval set books, and the idea of sneaking into a city and people being able to just pop up from the top of a rooftop and shoot at you with a bow and arrow or a crossbow is legit scary. You don't have to turn it into like this fake machine gun and they've got explosive arrows and all this stuff. Like
right.
These Arabs that they're fighting, I'm not sure if that's the correct word to describe them, but that's what they use in the movie, right? These Arabs that they're fighting are, I mean, they're basically a group of Hawkeyes.
Yeah, no, it's a very weird choice. I also have pretty negative feelings about it overall because, if I'm remembering correctly, George Bush actually used the word crusade to refer to the war in Iraq, which I had issues with as both an opponent to the war in Iraq and as a medievalist. That it very much, first of all, has this kind of effort to present it as this holy war, and then also implies that the Crusades are this kind of positive thing. And so I think there's this kind of effort in this movie to turn that on its head and say, yes, it's like the Crusades, but also both are bad. And I'm not saying both aren't bad, but they're also very much not the same thing, and they very much are not actually stemming from the same set of motivations. And they are not they are wars that look very different in a lot of ways, and I find that very frustrating as a commentary choice.
Yeah, it's just a weird thing, and also we know that Richard Lionheart went on his crusade just to hide the fact that he was gay. But anyway, that's beside the point. I saw that written somewhere during the week, and I just like the idea of it just made me laugh. It was like that, like. That would be fun if it was true. Not fun, sorry, a lot of people died. But like the idea that they're going back in time now and going, well, this is why he did it. It's because he was trying to deal with his homosexuality. You're like, I don't think there's any evidence towards that.
There's certainly no evidence that that's why he went on crusade. I think there are a decent amount of people who think that he might have had some kind of sexual relationship with the, at the time, King of France, Philip Augustus.
Well, in fairness, Philip really, really did eat those oysters in a sexual way, as we learned in Robin Hood.
He really did.
2010. Right, so we'll get through the scene. One of Robin's men gets taken by these nasty, nasty bad guys, and they go in to save them, and then they end up calling in the artillery. They catch a lot of the, I think, did you describe them as Moors?
Yes, they describe them as Moors, which I will talk about that terminology later on.
Yeah. So they catch some of these Moors and they start to kill them, including one who is basically a ninja, and he's been ninjaing through the thing, shooting people with double arrows and doing backflips, like cool backflips. Like it's an interesting chase scene. Robin is getting his ass kicked by this guy, but he's chained to the wall, and his son is one of the other people who are about to get held prisoner or about to be killed, and he tries to give up information and they kill his son anyway. Then Robin, who tries to stop them, allows this one particular Moor to escape. And then Robin he's in disgrace because he's just after attacking his fellow Crusaders. But because he's a fancy little rich boy, he gets sent home on a ship instead.
Yes. So he is sent home, but it is not a happy homecoming. For when he returns, he finds his men are desolate, and it turns out, and Marianne is no longer there, and it turns out that in his absence, the Sheriff of Nottingham had him declared dead so that he could steal all of his shit.
Yeah, pretty much. Because the Sheriff of Nottingham is going to make a run to be some sort of king, I imagine, is what they're going for.
Of course he does. Also, in the meantime, all of these citizens who I guess had been the people who are vaguely under Robin's lordship have all been sent to the coal mines to labor for the benefit of the sheriff.
Yeah. So it's a weird thing. So the sheriff is the one who took him or drafted him into the army. The sheriff is the one who appears to be paying for the war. And
he's
at
apparently
the same time,
the only person paying for the Crusades.
That is heavily implied later on. Himself and the bishop are conspiring.
Yeah, or the cardinal. It doesn't actually say that he's a bishop of anything. The cardinal. You would think he would be, but it never says that.
Yeah, it does. It's the cardinal. So, and it's just a weird thing because he comes back and his castle is in ruins. And you'd also think, like, yeah, I get it that the sheriff took over his lands or whatever. Why would he burn down the castle?
Right. Why isn't he using the castle?
Yeah.
It's like perfectly good castle.
To burn down. Marian's been thrown out and she's living down in the poor quarters as well. And
coal mines.
You just kind of like, whatever. Yeah. And he goes to try and find her when he comes back. And he sees that she's been like canoodling with Jamie Dornan, playing Will Scarlet.
She had to sign a contract and everything. It was a whole thing.
Yeah, it was weird. And he as every time he goes into his closet, he's taking out the jeans. She knows what it is. Like, that's why he's Will Scarlet, because he's got a scarlet room. Isn't it a red room?
Yeah, I think it's a red room.
Yeah. So he's Will Scarlet with his scarlet room. But he has a bit of a mental breakdown and goes running off. And as he does, the same Moor who had he tried to save his son is there waiting for him. And we also we kind of skipped it at the time. He had his hand chopped off while he was going to kill
right.
Robin, and somebody else came in and chopped his hand off. It might even have been Guy de Gisborne chopped off his hand.
Yeah, Guy de Gisborne is the crusade commander who
Yeah, he was the captain. He is playing the most SAS soldier who's ever been an SAS soldier in anything. If you've ever played the Call of Duty games, he's basically playing one of the main characters of the first Modern Warfare games. Like, it's weird. He's got the full handlebar mustache, the whole lot. Like,
and SAS is
weird.
British Army?
Yes, okay. Special Air Services.
Okay.
They're like, the best way to describe it would be they're the British equivalent of the Navy SEALs.
Okay.
Or, as my dad used to put it, who was not in the SAS, he was in the Green Berets, but as my dad used to describe it, the right hard motherfuckers, Ollie.
Yeah. So that's who they are. But so now we have our Jaime Lannister-esque Jamie Foxx with his one hand. Has apparently followed Robin to England and goes into this whole thing about how now we need to work together to stop the war, and also, like, everyone's oppressing the poor, and that's bad because I guess he's a communist internationalist now. And in a not especially convincing scene, manages to convince Robin that the two of them should now side together and fight against Nottingham and the Cardinal.
Yeah, it's a weird scene. Right. So we were comparing this to The Dark Knight, which I think is a great movie, and Sarah said was terrible.
I was talking about this movie. I love The Dark Knight.
Sarah, you can't roll back on it now. We have the videotape, so audio recordings. God, that was terrible at this evening. But this is reminiscent of scenes from the first of those Batman movies, the Nolan Batman movies, where Liam Neeson's character, who I'm surprised isn't in this, where Liam Neeson's character, Ra's al Ghul, is trying to convince Batman that he should go and destroy Gotham because it's good for everybody, and it's capitalism at its worst, blah 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 blah, and a better stuff will rise from the ashes, and that's what John is basically saying here, is that capitalism has taken over the world, and if we can destroy capitalism, then everybody else will become equals. And it's like, oh, I don't think so, dude.
Yeah, he also, so by the way, he introduces himself as Yahya, and then immediately tells Robin that can be translated as John. There is, as usual, a whole kind of subtle language thing happening here, in that there's zero reason that man would know English. Literally zero.
He knows parkour and crazy ninja skills, Sarah. So knowing English is the least of his problems.
The parkour makes more sense than the English.
So what he has done is he's convincing Robin to schmoozle or schmozzle his way in to Ben Mendelsohn's inner circle. And schmozzle, yeah. And he's... So again, this is going back to... If you watch the Nolan Batman movies, there's a scene where Alfred tells Batman, Bruce Wayne, you can't just be doing nothing. You have to still be seen to be Bruce Wayne.
Right, you have to be like at parties and being the wealthy playboy.
At parties and stuff. And that's basically what I can't pronounce it, Sarah, so I'm just going to say John. That's basically what John says to Robin, which is, you go in there and you become part of his inner circle by, funding his stuff, by using money or whatever to fund him for his war efforts. Drinking,
like really creepily
asshole.
Leaning in and saying, "I want to earn your favor. I want to earn your favor."
Yeah, it's so bad. I want to be your guy, and it's like, oh, okay, interesting. But so all of this is happening, and it's very reminiscent of scenes in The Dark Knight and scenes in Batman Begins. In particular, they do a couple of jobs where they steal from the church collection. The church are obviously been funding, been used to fund Nottingham's war effort. So they're stealing from that, and then the next day he comes in and he's giving more. And he's taking the money that he stole, he's giving back publicly, going, "Oh, look at me and how good I am at doing all this stuff." And this scenes with Will Tillman, who's Will Scarlet, and he's like, "Oh, I don't know about this masked hood, this guy who's been stealing from the rich." I mean,
yes, because
there are
other
ways.
The Hood. I would like to comment.
Yes,
the Hood again. We're doing
hood.
This.
Yeah, we have to do it. Robin of the Hood. I hope at some stage is mentioned. But yeah. So if you think back to The Dark Knight, there's a scene where they're out to dinner, and Harvey Dent is like, "Oh, well, he's a masked crusader, and he's a good guy or whatever. But I mean, we should be doing this through political means." That scene is literally in this movie.
Yep. Because so they're the exact same characters. It is also around at this point that I feel like we started wondering, why isn't anyone surprised about where Robin, a person who has been dispossessed of all of his wealth already by the sheriff, why is no one wondering where he gets this money from? This is never discussed.
It's one of just the weirdest things you're ever going to see. Just like he shows up and he starts giving money, and nobody ever, even for a second, thinks, "Where's he getting all that money from?" Yeah. It's just like, oh, he's a lord, therefore he's got money. We also have an awesome, I was going to say an awesome scene. It's meant to be an awesome scene, where or John teaches him how to fight better and to do archery, which means he can fire 3 arrows from a bow at the same time. I've watched videos of the best archers in the world using the best compound bows that anyone's ever touched in their life, and they cannot do these things that Robin Hood is trying to pretend to do. Like, it's if he's training to do them and you can get better. Like, you can't hold 2 arrows in your hand, have them semi-knocked to a bow, and fire a third arrow. Like, it just doesn't work.
Right.
And because in order for your hand to still be holding the arrows, like, you're going to be reducing the tension on the string, which means that it's not going to fire forward and this stuff. But like, all of these things are happening in the movie, and it's a cool scene where John gets him to fire arrows at him as he walks towards him, and he's basically matrixing out of the way.
Yeah.
Like,
yep, just all Muslims are Neo from the Matrix now, so that's cool.
That's basically, well, it's kind of cool to see them represented as not just being evil, but yeah, it's really weird. Sarah does point out that there's some 14th century Italian paintings, which are just so anachronistic.
Yeah, so I'll talk about this a bit more later, but he is using for target practice a bunch of 14th century Italian paintings of saints. So in addition to the issues that we have 14th century Italian paintings in 12th to 13th century England, we also have what are clearly paintings of saints being used as target practice, which I have thoughts about.
Oh, I have thoughts about too. It's the best thing to use a saint for. So
I think I'm a better Catholic than you are.
Yeah, you probably are. There are some really interesting fashion choices here, including the odd velvet turtleneck that shows up. You're like, this doesn't seem like right, but okay, let's just go with this. The sheriff, in getting bamboozled by Robin and all his money, starts saying things like the fog of war is falling on us. And
yep, he literally says the fog of war because we were the analogies were too subtle before.
Marion comes to talk to Robin and he ignores her, and then they meet again and he comes along and he basically says, you moved on. Why? And he's been like an absolute asshole to her. And it's like, oh, you said you'd wait for me. He was declared dead. People said they saw his body.
Yeah, it's not like she was like, well, I don't know, maybe he's not coming back. It was that like literally everyone announced that he was dead and kicked her out of his house because he was dead now.
Yeah, but there's a little scene. So it's very quickly in the scene. She says, two soldiers said they saw your body. Right. They said they saw you beheaded or whatever. So it's like, what did they expect? Like,
why should she not believe that?
I get this. Yeah, like I understand, and that's how it goes. But he starts breaking in and stealing stuff, and there's a couple of scenes where he starts giving, like, she's the one who gives him the idea to give the money because she's like, oh yeah, he's stealing stuff, he's just stealing it for himself. Like, he's not a man of the people. So then he starts going around and distributing his money, and then people start going, oh, who's this thief, this guy with the hood? So they start hammering the hood into walls and on their doors just to show that they believe in the hood or whatever it is.
The disembodied hood.
And the disembodied hood, yeah. And there's a scene where, for me, like, there's a dude just hammers this straight into a wall. There's no cracking, there's no nothing. It's just like one solid hit, and this
into a stone wall.
And it's a stone wall. And it's like, no, that's not gonna happen. What are you doing, you people? But yeah, he's now super rich. Nobody seems to care, and because he gives so much money to Krennic stroke Nottingham, they suck him in, and he becomes part of the inner circle.
Yeah, so he is invited, of course, to the fancy party that the sheriff has given in honor of the visiting cardinal. The sheriff has also thrown a sop to those commoners and has invited Will and Marion. And it is at this party that Marion and Robin overhear that the Crusades are a church plot and that they are also funding the Muslim army and want the war to end badly so that they can take over from the king.
We've watched movies which have convoluted plots, like the Three Musketeers one from 2012 or whatever it was, or was it even before that? I can't remember.
The 93 Three Musketeers is the one that also had that weird, like, church taking over the state plot.
Yeah, but I'm thinking more the one, so the steampunk one.
Oh, yeah.
The plot was to disgrace the king and have him start a war, and because he's a cuckold, people would suddenly support the cardinal.
Right.
When he said, like, that's, so I'm getting it, it's like, it's super convoluted, and you're like, what are you doing, these people? But so the cardinal's coming all the way from Rome, whatever, and in behind the scenes, Will Scarlet Marion and Friar Tuck have been working to raise the populace up,
right,
to try and overthrow, or at least fight back against the oppressive regime. And Robin gets in on this, and then he sees Friar Tuck, and he's like, right, I need to find a way to get into that room, so I'm going to give Friar Tuck up. And he says, I saw somebody breaking into your room, and the only person who has that key is Friar Tuck. And he brings him in to where the cardinal is, and he says, do you have your key, Friar Tuck? Friar Tuck obviously doesn't have the key because he gave it away.
Right.
And it's left to the point where they're like, right, and they're going to have him killed. And then Robin's like, no, don't kill him, have him defrocked.
That's worse.
Because that's worse. And they're all like, ha 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 ha, that's worse. It's not worse.
Not worse.
He's clearly not a very churchy friar, if you know what I mean.
As usual.
It's just, it's bad.
Yeah. So that's all very dumb, but Friar Tuck's not dead, so I guess that's fine.
No, it's good. Yeah, he's still alive. And then the Sheriff of Nottingham was like, Robin, thanks a million. I'm going to tell you all about our crazy plot now, and you're a part of it. Also, we're going to bring in some muscle to help us defend against this Hood character. And it's Guy de Gisborne.
Right.
And he shows up, and he's got his little group of SAS dudes with him, and they're all speaking in their rough British accents, and they're going to come and they're going to crush the small people, and if they twist them hard enough, they'll give up who Robin is. And it's just one of those shitty ones.
So
it's just...
Yeah. So yet another thing in this movie that makes no sense. Guy de Gisborne knows who Robin of Locksley is, and knows that he's the person who, was like disgraced in the Crusade. At some point they we'll get to this in a second. I'm getting a little ahead, but at some point they find John, and it's like nobody ever wonders, could it be that guy?
It's one of the stupidest things that this movie could possibly have done is he finds John. So what happens is they go to make a raid on the mint, right? Where all of the money is stored, right? And they're doing a good job of it until Robin fucks up, basically. And then they have to go and try and escape. And John gives himself up in order for Robin and Marion to escape, right? And he's tortured by the sheriff. And Gisborne comes down, and Gisborne recognizes him as the guy from Fallujah at the beginning.
Right? But never says, wait, he's here. The guy who helped him is right over there. I wonder if we should interrogate him.
But that's the thing is they're torturing him, and he says it at one point, I think, is who's aiding you? Is it the same person who aided you in Accra? You know who aided him. You hated him. The first thing you said to Robin when you showed up was, I'll not forget what you did in Accra.
Right. So why aren't they bringing him in for questioning? It's so obvious, but nobody bothers to. Especially because, by the way, Robin does an incredibly terrible job of disguising himself because, unlike Christian Bale as Batman, who puts on that silly deep voice all the time,
Batman.
Robin maybe should have tried to do a Batman voice, because instead he speaks to Marion at some point when she doesn't yet know who he is officially, and he just speaks to her in his completely normal voice, and then she's like, Robin? And he's like, how did you guess? Dude, you're dating this one for poor. 3 years. Of course she recognized your voice.
So Will Scarlet has all of the poor people, and he's like, we should talk, and we should go and give our demands and tell him that we're not going to work in the mines. And then and Marion says, no, Robin, you should go in and reveal yourself to be the Hood, and then we'll see what happens. And Robin does, and all of them love him, and he's inciting them to riot, basically, and make a play against the sheriff. During the time that this is happening, he falls into a pit, and he kisses Marion, just as Will is walking up and looks into the pit and sees it happening. Now, Marion rejects him at this point. He kisses her, and she pulls away, and she goes I can't.
Yeah.
Right? And if Will had have, it's one of those movie things where if Will had have stayed for 2 seconds more,
right,
he would have seen this, but he doesn't because he walks off. He's like, oh, that's how it is, basically. And he goes to walk off, and then there's an explosion goes off, and he gets horribly burned in the face. But Robin goes back to save him. Only half of his face. Like another character we could name, right? Yeah, that's right. The Emperor. No, obviously Harvey Two-Face, because he's the he's the political side of the issue. And but Robin goes back in to save him with Marion, and like at this point it just gets all muddled and confused. And there's a scene where Robin gives himself up. So he stands up and he goes, "I'm Robin Hood. Come and take me to soldiers to stop the riot." Right. And
I think that he also is getting like Crusades PTSD flashbacks right at that moment too, which is an interesting choice.
It is a really, well, I would say interesting choice, or shall we say bad choice, right? So he's having these flashbacks, but he gives himself up and he is captured and he's brought in to stand in front of the Sheriff of Nottingham, and they're all about to kill him. And so he's sitting there, and then John, who has somehow managed to escape, is dressed as one of the guards, and even though they're about to kill him, to kill Robin, he helps to kill all the other guards, and then Robin and John somehow manage to kill the sheriff. Now, the sheriff's obviously not going to be able to beat any of them in a sword fight because he's just the sheriff. He's not a badass.
Right.
And they hang him.
Yeah, and what is, I would say, an unnecessarily dramatic means of killing him.
Yeah, there was this stage it's 2 against 1. Like, they could just literally cut his head off.
Yeah. Also, unnecessarily dramatically, there is the cross clatters to the ground in symbolism.
Very, very subtle symbolism.
So subtle.
So Robin, Marion, and a lot of townsfolk flee and take refuge in Sherwood Forest. And the Cardinal, played by F. Murray Abraham, kind of approaches Will and goes, "Now that you're ugly and Marion's never going to want to be with you, despite the fact that she has rejected Robin, I want to make you sheriff." And he agrees as long as he gets to declare Robin outlaws. So at the end, outlaw, exactly. At the end, he's giving a speech, and you can see his horribly scarred half of his face, and he's got like a sheet that says outlaw in his hand, and then Robin shoots an arrow through it from a long way away. And it's like, oh wow, this is the start of Robin the Outlaw, which we're going to get in the definite sequel that's definitely going to happen to this movie because it made billions of dollars in the box office.
Yeah. Also, important, apparently Director Krennic's outfit that the Sheriff of Nottingham was wearing is the uniform for the Sheriff of Nottingham because Will Scarlet is wearing it at the end.
It's such a weird choice to have him wear the exact same stuff. It's like, is that, like, I don't think Sheriff of Nottingham is like Sheriff in an American town. Because that's what they seem to think it is. No, you
basically wear regular clothes, I think.
Also, another thing that I want to point out is because I said this to Sarah during the week. I sent her a screenshot actually of it yesterday. I discovered that there's a game called Sheriff of Nottingham, a board game, which I watched a Let's Play of yesterday, and it looks like a barrel of fun.
Don and Benjamin have it, apparently.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So it looks great. I think it seems to be you need to have 4 players to play it.
Yeah.
So, if you guys are ever over in Ireland at some stage, we'll definitely get down to some Sheriff of Nottingham business.
Exactly. I'll crash Don and Benjamin's future trip and make them bring the Sheriff of Nottingham game.
Exactly. And that's it. That's how the movie ends. So it's basically like it is setting up for I'm assuming they wanted to make like a slew of these movies.
Oh, they clearly wanted to make a slew of these movies. This didn't do very well.
No.
Probably they won't. You know, I'm almost a little disappointed because this is terrible. But it was kind of entertaining.
Yeah.
To hate watch.
Like, it's weird about this one, right? No, but I suppose we'll get we'll get to this
Right.
at the end when we do our estimatio. But we watched not in the Name of the King, Legend of the Sword, right? And when we were recording that one, you told me that they had originally planned to make 6 movies.
Yeah.
And that obviously they weren't going to because they didn't make any money or whatever. And loads of people go to bat and say, oh, I actually like Legend of Sword, including a certain Beth Grinfeld. I've made her sound like she's a Bond villain there.
Whether she likes Legend of the Sword, it's very
Legend of the Sword. But I have heard this, and I have heard some other people whose opinions I normally agree with saying they like Legend of the Sword. This is a much better movie than Legend of the Sword. It's terrible.
Terrible, but it's fun. Like, this is... so we'll get to in terms of what this, like, shakes out in terms of our actual ratings, but I would call this a good bad movie.
Yeah,
in
I don't think good bad
Flophouse
movies...
lingo.
Yeah, and I don't think good bad movies exist, so I'm just going to call this a movie I kind of liked. But we'll talk about that when we get to the end.
We'll get there.
Now we get my favorite bit, which is when Sarah goes off on one on the movie. So we're going to talk about what the movie gets right and what the movie gets wrong in the section we call Vere et Falso. Sarah, can you tell us what the movie got very?
Yeah, so there were things this movie got right. So, first of all, I did check. Yahya is more or less the Arabic equivalent of John. So, for example, if when they refer to John the Baptist, who is accepted as a prophet in Islam, he is referred to as Yahya in Arabic sources. I do, however, by the way, call bullshit both on John knowing any English, and at the end there's a little bit where he introduces himself to Friar Tuck as Yahya, and Friar Tuck then says, "Oh, can I just call you John?" No way that dude knows Arabic, especially because he's kind of presented as basically a parish priest who are very uneducated. So.
Oh, wow. Just throw some abuse the Christians' way there, Sarah.
Other Christians are educated, but parish priests are pretty much the least educated of the clergy. Like, people complain all the time about the fact that some of them can barely read.
Oh, that is true. And we're not even talking about back then. We're talking about now.
Yeah, now I thought they just complained about all of the molestation of young boys, but...
And how they're not allowed to do it anymore.
Theoretically.
Oh, shit. Wait, I still work for the Catholic Church.
We can cut this out.
Oh, no, I'm leaving it in. This is good.
I
want them to know I don't approve.
So, another thing that they did actually got right, we talked about canon law before. So, Friar Tuck is accused of the crime of falsehood under canon law. I'm not exactly sure that's what he's actually doing, but that is a real crime. Medieval canon law does deal regularly with the question of falsehood, and in particular, false testimony and lying under oath. And that is something that you could be punished for, although you would not typically be defrocked for this, as was Friar Tuck.
Friar Tuck was defrocked because he had betrayed them.
Right, so but the crime that they claimed they were charging him with to justify it was falsehood under canon law.
Oh, see, I didn't quite get it. I know they said that about falsehood under canon law. What would have happened to them if they wouldn't have been defrocked? Because they were about to kill him.
Right. So neither of those would have been the punishment, essentially. There would have been maybe a temporary suspension, I think. But honestly, probably
Slap
a fine.
Like a
fine, honestly, basically, is probably what would have happened.
Yeah. So they didn't get it right in either direction, because they definitely were about to kill this dude. It was like, no, defrock him instead. That's worse for a priest.
Yeah, so there were things that were right about it, but it wasn't quite there. Also, by the way, shout out to my friend John Burden for being my canon law expert on this.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a really cool way to describe somebody. He's an expert in canon law.
Yeah. It was those good historians of canon law. So
not canon law, Sarah. Canon law.
Make it sound really badass.
The law of canons. Cool, because that's what this movie does with everything. The law of canons, exactly.
Another thing that they actually seem to have gotten right is coal mining was apparently something that they were doing in England as far back as the Roman period. And it is referred to again, at least in sources from the 13th century. So it's not outside the realm of possibility that it would be happening here. And in fact, Nottinghamshire was one of the places where there were coal mines in the 13th century. However, these mines look like they are the Industrial Revolution.
They look way beyond the Industrial Revolution. These things look like something you'd expect in steampunk fantasy setting. It's like it's one step away from the mines of Mordor.
Right. Whereas the, coal mining in the Middle Ages happened, but it's basically surface mining, essentially, and would have looked very different and involved very different technology than what we see here, which looks pretty modern / steampunk.
Yeah, it's a weird how large the mines are, how industrialized they are is kind of off-putting to me.
Yeah.
But it's still like I appreciate that they were going for something different, I suppose.
Right. And I think that's part of the set of what I would call deliberate anachronisms, which I do think can work in a movie. I mean, A Knight's Tale is, I think, a really good example of how it can work. I don't think it necessarily works here. So you have the mines, you have the weaponry, as we've talked about a little bit before, and you have the clothing. So we've already talked about Nottingham's sci-fi Rogue One outfit. I'm pretty sure Marion and I have the same makeup. Will Scarlett's literally wearing a button-down shirt, and Friar Tuck clearly bought his glasses at Warby Parker.
Yeah, Friar Tuck has some of the coolest glasses I've ever seen in a character in a movie. It's weird.
That dude is trendy. That is not a churchy friar. That is a trendy friar.
He is. This is your right. So it's not something that we get over here in Ireland typically, right? But when I'm watching movies, he looks like your trendy hipster pastor.
Yeah.
That you see in American teen movies, oh yeah, I'm down with the kids, and I'll turn my chair around and sit cross-legged on it or whatever, and talk to you and get real for a minute or whatever. That's what he looks like. And it's something that kind of works a little bit because he's only a minor character. Will Scarlett's regular button-down, I'm going to work shirt.
Right.
And cardigan. He's wearing a cardigan at one point. I'm I can't imagine cardigans were common at the time.
Yeah. So there are a number of deliberate anachronisms which could maybe have worked in a better movie, but this is not that movie.
No.
There's also a lot that they get wrong. So first of all, they constantly use the term Moor to refer to the Muslims. And that is a term that I would say is generally in this period used not as a catch-all term for all Muslims, but that tends to be used primarily to refer to the Muslims who are based in the Iberian Peninsula. So it is a weird choice, at least, to use that to talk about the Muslims in the Middle East. Then there's just the Crusades. Just all of them. So, first of all, you don't get drafted into the Crusades. You
don't?
No, you are a pilgrim. If you're going on Crusades, you're expected to take the cross. You don't just get forced into going on crusade, especially if you're a lord. I mean, there might be some forms of pressure, but that's not the same as a draft. So that is a weird choice. And then, of course, the twist of the sheriff and the cardinal who are playing both sides to depose the king makes no sense, and also is, once again, this, bizarre... I don't understand why these medieval movies are convinced that the churchmen want to, take over the state. I don't get where that's coming from.
I see, this is the thing, is this notion of the church trying to take over the state, I think this is a new thing that they're trying to like movies are trying to force onto it. I don't think any historian has ever sat down and said, well, the church were trying to, like, I'm sure there was interference, right? But they were, as you said, they were never going to replace the kings, because that makes no sense.
Right. I mean, there's a big difference between the church wanting essentially more control over what the kings are doing versus wanting to become king.
Right. So the way I see this is, right, so this is a modern screenwriting thing where, no, see, it's hard to say what I'm about to say without sounding like I'm defending religion, and I'm not. I'm very clearly not a religious person. I have a PhD in physics and a master's degree in engineering. Guys, I'm not a religious-y person. Please don't think I am, right? But
you're not a churchy person.
I'm not a churchy person at all. But a lot of people are so anti the church that it's so easy. So it's like I'm aggressively atheist is the way to describe it, right? So they want to write stuff where the church are the bad guys. Now, the church did a lot of shitty things, but the idea of them, we're going to try and take over a country, I'm going to be the new king, like, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Because as Sarah said repeatedly, like, they can't have become the new kings. Even them being the power behind the throne, they could do that with any king, because the church was a powerful enough entity and people really believed in God back in the time, and they believed in the Christian church, that if the bishop or the pope came along and excommunicated a king, it would cause serious problem for that king.
Right. And so that happened, and there were issues surrounding that. Exactly.
So kings would want to keep the church on their side. So this notion that they're going to depose them and take over, and it really feels like hey, I'm a screenwriter and I want to write something edgy, and I'm an atheist and I want to get across my atheism is good and all church and all religion is bad. So I'm going to make them the bad guys in this movie. Like, if you want to do that, just write a screenplay about what the Catholic Church did in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. I'll give you an idea. If you happen to be a screenwriter and you're listening, I want you to look up the Magdalene Laundries. I want you to look up Tuam Magdalene Laundry and the 700 children that they murdered and buried in the back garden. Like, look up those people. Write a screenplay about those. You don't have to fabricate them trying to take over England in the Middle Ages. This happened in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in a first world country. Like, you don't have to go looking for stuff to throw at the church. Just write what would have happened and go for some sort of historical accuracy where you don't make your movie look like it's ridiculous. Like, when you see somebody as accomplished as Sarah writing down the cardinal playing both sides in order to depose the king after he loses the Crusades is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and I hate it. Like, when she's writing that into your notes, you fucked up, screenwriters. So maybe do a better job.
Right. And then it's also, I mean, even within the Middle Ages, there's plenty of things that you could criticize the church about, like the fact that at various points there were people associated with the church engaged in virulent anti-Jewish preaching that essentially encouraged people to massacre the Jews. That's something that you could talk about if you wanted to criticize the actual medieval church.
Exactly. There's plenty of stuff that happened without making up other stuff. If you want to go against the church, if you want to paint them in a bad light, they've already done that for you. You just need to show people that this is what happened. Don't make up any other random stuff.
Right. And it also frustrates me the extent to which, once again, nobody can take religion seriously at all. So if you're in the church, if you're a high-ranking person in the church, you're only a high-ranking person because you want to gain power. So at some point, the cardinal even says something like, "This is why the church created hell." It's like, come on.
Yeah, and we know the church didn't create hell.
I mean, I'm not saying they didn't, but no, they actually didn't, because the Jews actually did come up with hell first.
See, I was going to say that, but then I was like, wait, am I going to come across as really anti-Semitic if I say we know the church didn't? The Jews did.
Yeah, because we actually had a concept of hell before we had a concept of heaven.
Yeah, because you stole heaven from us.
It was sort of a simultaneous development. Sort of a simultaneous development.
You stole it from the physicists, Sarah. That's what you did.
The church made up purgatory.
Oh.
Yeah. That's clearly like a thing that the church made up. Like, if you wanted to be really cynical, you could make an argument, although I wouldn't quite make this argument, that the church invented purgatory to get money. Because then people had to basically pay monasteries and churches to pray for them so that they'd get out of purgatory faster.
Oh, indulgences is the way forward.
Yeah.
I love it. But that's what led to the Great Schism. Or sorry, one of the things that led to the Great Schism. One thing I do want to say about purgatory is when you bring it up is I know I've never told this story anywhere before. When I was 11 and the teacher first mentioned purgatory, they described it as, and you go to live in limbo. And I had literally just seen something that weekend about limbo.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that sounds like way worse than hell. And he said, why? And I was, in all honesty, I was looking at him and I went, I hate Jamaican steel drums. And I still do. Like, it's with traditional Irish instruments, it's up there with my least favorite sound in the world. I can't listen to them for more than maybe 30 seconds and I'm good. Like, I want to move on. And in my head, I was like, oh, imagine having to listen.
You have to listen to, you have to limbo for eternity.
I was like, oh my God. And even I'm looking back now, I'm thinking, that teacher must have thought I was an absolute idiot. And that's probably not even the worst thing. I think I definitely used a racial slur in that class once as well, like in the middle of class, because I was trying to rap. I was doing a rap song and whatever. It was bad.
To make you feel better, limbo and purgatory are actually different things. So your teacher was actually wrong.
Oh, thank God. Yeah, so I was. Take that, Mr. Sheridan.
Because purgatory is where you would go if you're like, you kind of sucked, but you genuinely repented, and then you can basically work off your sins and maybe eventually go to heaven. Limbo is where you go basically if you are a good person who didn't accept Jesus. So, like, all of the babies who didn't get baptized are in limbo, and everybody who lived before Jesus who wasn't taken out of hell by Jesus, basically in between his death and resurrection. And Dante at least puts in there a couple of the, I think, like, at least Muslim kind of intellectual luminaries.
Oh,
so
interesting. I genuinely don't know that.
Yeah, because so limbo would be like good people who aren't Christians, basically.
And purgatory are people who weren't good enough to get into heaven.
Yeah, but like you could get into heaven eventually, because the only salvation is through Christ, according to your religion.
Well, of course. It is. It's true. Friar Tuck is really happy about getting defrocked, Sarah. Mm-hmm. Is that something that priests would have been back in the day?
Probably not, honestly, because, so first of all, it's again, why can't people occasionally take religion seriously in these movies? But also, honestly, getting defrocked as a priest is not great because it basically means you lose your livelihood. So he's all like, I'm free, but then it's like, no, what the fuck do you think you're gonna do? You're not qualified to do anything else. Like, this is your job. Like, that's basically the equivalent of, like, you've gotten fired for the one job you've been training for your entire life and could never get rehired.
Well, this guy also speaks Arabic.
Yeah, he wouldn't have done that, so. But yeah, so also, like, a note, this movie also seems to think that a friar and a parish priest are the same thing, which they're not, though I will say, at least, unlike some other Robin Hood movies, it doesn't make him into a Franciscan, which didn't exist yet, so it's kind of a draw on that front. But as I said before, the parish priests, which is what he is kind of presented as, were very much the least educated segment of the Christian clergy. And as well, Christians learning Arabic, which is something that they did in the West mostly as a means of converting Muslims or trying to convert Muslims, didn't become very popular until I think at least the kind of mid-13th century. So him knowing Arabic seems very unlikely.
Yeah, awesome.
Also, one more thing, I looked up English cardinals during this period, and you will not be surprised to hear that Cardinal Franklin is not a real person.
No. No, Sarah, Are you telling me he's not a real person?
He's not.
I assumed that's who you were going to talk about in Historia et Veritas.
I did not. I had a rough time figuring out what to talk about in Historia et Veritas.
Sarah, if the Cardinal, wasn't a real person, are we going to be able to do Historia et Veritas?
We're going to try because
Okay.
Well, yeah, we're gonna try.
Because I'm not gonna sing it if we're not gonna do it.
No, we're gonna do it.
Okay. Historia et Veritas.
So, while this movie did manage to not have a single real historical figure, it did have a poorly depicted real historical event, and that is the Third Crusade. So the Third Crusade, in relation, this follows very nicely on our last episode, was a response to the 1187 conquest of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem had been conquered. So reportedly, the Pope Urban III, collapsed and died as soon as he heard the news of the conquest of Jerusalem. And the new Pope, Gregory VIII, relatively quickly called a crusade. And so basically there are 3 rulers who kind of get on board with this whole crusade plan. So the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick I Barbarossa, Henry II of England, and Philip II, also known as Philip Augustus of France. So Henry and Philip start to raise funds before setting out, and in the meantime, Henry died while dealing with the civil war that his sons were fomenting against him. One of those sons, Richard I, the Lionheart, then becomes king. And, they then kind of continued with the preparations for the crusade. And by the way, related to what we talked about before, there are those that think that there was some kind of sexual relationship between Richard and Philip. And this is actually depicted in, or at least kind of hinted at, I'd say somewhere in between depicted and hinted at in Lion in Winter, which is a better movie than this.
Wait, sorry, Sarah. Are you claiming The Lion in Winter is a better movie than this?
Yes.
That 5-star classic movie.
I'm going to go really out on a limb. I'm going to do the hot take of saying that Lion in Winter, an Oscar award-winning movie, is better than the 2018 Robin Hood.
Listen, this is so controversial. I just don't even understand what you're saying
now. So there was actually a Christian power that did side with the Muslims during the Crusade, and that was the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Emperor, basically because the Western Christians are the fucking worst. Like, just every time they, wander through Constantinople and are just terrible. This, of course, culminating in the Fourth Crusade, when the Western Christian Crusaders basically just said, fuck it, stopped, and conquered Constantinople instead of actually going on crusade. But they did not quite do this. But however, the whole thing had, I would say, rather mixed results. So Frederick died in 1190. Richard and Philip then fell out after Richard broke off his engagement to Philip's sister, and decided to marry instead a princess from the Iberian kingdom of Navarre, whose name is Berengaria, a name that should really come back into fashion.
Yeah, that's an awesome name, Berengaria.
Yeah, it was the Catalan version, Berenguera, was very popular as well. I have a lot of Berengueras in my document. And also some great families where Berenguer marries Berenguera and then they name their children Berenguer and Berenguera. It goes in a terrible
I know
dinner.
I've said before that I'd like to call my kid Marilyn if I have another one in the future, but I don't know, Berenguera.
Yeah, if you have a daughter, she could be Berenguera.
Definitely, I'm gonna go for it.
Yeah.
Marilyn and Berenguera.
Uh-huh. I think I would name a cat Berenguera. I'm not sure I'd saddle a child with that. And I couldn't call a dog that, because can you imagine
maybe.
being at the park yelling Berengeta? um, anyway, so the relationship between Philip and Richard soured after he broke off this engagement in favor of another alliance. At the same time, things are also, they do manage, despite this dissension, to take the city of Acre. Richard then requests a meeting with Saladin to discuss some possible terms. Saladin delays. In response, Richard, charmingly, executed 2,700 Muslim prisoners. And Saladin then, in retaliation, executed all of the Christian prisoners he had. So everyone was just very nice. They then basically, there was these kind of interpersonal conflicts and also disagreements over strategy. So the Crusader forces basically split into two factions, meaning that there was not a single Crusader army that was actually at all strong enough to even bother trying to reconquer Jerusalem. So at this point, they did eventually get a meeting with Saladin and managed to at least kind of win the concession that they were able to kind of hold on to Acre for now, and that he would allow Christian pilgrims and traders into the city of Jerusalem, which he had not been doing over the last, kind of 4 years at this point. The other way in which this crusade, by the way, did not go great is that Richard, en route back from the crusade, was captured by Leopold, Duke of Austria, and then held by him and the Holy Roman Emperor for 2 years. And the story that actually tends to be the kind of background story for Robin Hood is that they are sucking a lot of money out of the populace in an effort to collect money to pay Richard's ransom, which is a lot. I don't have the exact sum written down, but it's a lot of money. So the Crusades ultimately kept Richard out of his kingdom for about half of his total reign, so about 5 years, between his actual crusading and his being held hostage in the Holy Roman Empire. He ultimately, despite being a kind of well-remembered king in England in a lot of ways, was ultimately probably not an especially successful one, and to some extent that had something to do with his involvement in this crusading venture.
This is very interesting. Like, when you think about it, like, you could make a really good movie about this. I mean,
you really could.
But you could, but like, it's always fascinating. And at some point, people will be listening to our episode on Kingdom of Heaven, Sarah's favorite movie of all time. And when you listen to that, that's about the Crusades as well. And there's so much more interesting stuff going around at this time that people are just passing over to go for sensational, violence-y type stuff and church trying to take over countries. Like, you can avoid most of that and actually just focus on the actual history of it, and I guarantee you people will want to watch your movie if you do it well.
Yep. And also, by the way, person who was running things at this time when the crusade was happening, Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Oh, of course. Yep. She was, because Eleanor of Aquitaine is the most, I'm going to use the word that I very rarely use, she's a badass bitch.
Yes, she is.
I'm going to get that on a shirt.
Boss bitch, Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Hashtag let him die, and then on the back, boss bitch, Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Those are going to be the Media-eval shirts.
They're perfect. Sarah, that's I love that stuff. I think it's incredibly interesting. But now we should talk about what we would do if we were making a movie called Robin Hood brackets 2018. So this is what we like to call Fabula Nostra, where we talk about a movie we would make. Sarah, tell me about the movie that nobody would want to watch that you want to make.
So, I've decided that if we're going to do Not Your Daddy's Robin Hood, which is what this movie totally is going for, I want to do a little fun gender swapping and also maybe a little fun representation of a not straight relationship. So, I am going to have my Robin be played by Emma Watson. So she is going to be our kind of young noblewoman who, trains to fight and ultimately kind of rebels, and is declared an outlaw. She is going to have a relationship with, instead of Marion, I'm going to be calling her Maria, and she is going to be somebody who had been originally from Spain and is going to be played by Selena Gomez, and she is a young widow who then takes up with Emma Watson, and they're kind of off running in the forest together. I am going to keep the Sheriff of Nottingham and Friar Tuck male to reflect the fact that I am still setting this in a semi-realistic medieval universe. So the Sheriff of Nottingham I'm going to have played by Leonardo DiCaprio, because I feel like Leonardo DiCaprio has done some really solid villains, and I think he could pull it off. I'm going to have Friar Tuck played by Alfred Molina. I think he could be a fun kind of like older friar, somewhat older in relation to the women friar figure. And I'm also going to have a Scarlet who is going to be played by Aubrey Plaza. So I think it'd be fun to have this movie be mostly about some kind of like young women revolutionaries who are trying to fight against their oppression, and maybe just I'll do a little bit of anachronism and have them fight against the patriarchy. However, despite them fighting against the patriarchy, what I think would be fun to do is to have in this movie the kind of royal figure who you occasionally see, who is the person, in charge and who is like trying to make sure that taxes get paid, is in fact going to be Eleanor of Aquitaine, who is not going to be a villain because I love her too much to make her a villain, but is going to be somebody who is not as concerned with the sufferings of the lower classes as might be considered ideal. So she's not going to be like a cartoon villain or anything like that. She's basically going to be like, I don't care, this isn't my problem, essentially. And she is going to be played by Helen Mirren.
Oh, well.
Did I steal yours?
You just did, but I'm going to put her in anyway.
Fine. That one wasn't in my notes, so.
That's literally.
That was what you're just looking up. Well, I've seen the piece of paper, so I can confirm that we came up with that independently. So, Ollie, tell me about the movie that you would make.
Well, first of all, I want to watch that. I think this is every now and then Sarah comes up with the idea if we'll do a gender swap, and I always go nah. Well, actually, I think that sounds really interesting. Women can't have starring roles, Sarah.
We get max one woman per movie. More is far too many.
I'm going to do something completely different here, right? So, because this is probably my last. I'm going to come back for some guest episodes, but this is my last time as a minting, so I'm going to go completely off.
Okay.
And I'm going to adapt Robin Hood from my personal favorite Robin Hood story, right? Now, the movie would still be called Robin Hood. And I want the listeners to just go with me on this a little bit, because the story I'm about to tell and adapt into a movie is insane, right? It's based on a book called Morning Star by David Gemmell, and if I come back in the future to do guest episodes, I'm going to get Sarah a copy of this and we're going to read it and go through it, because my God, do I love this movie or this book, right? And I want it to be adapted into a movie, right? So it starts with a he's a middle-aged man. He's in his 30s, late 30s, so old age for the time, right? And he's sitting in an inn and he's telling the story of how he met Jarek Mace, right? Now, Jarek Mace, we're going to come to later on, is actually Robin Hood, right? But
Robin of the Hood.
This character's name is Robin of the Hood. His name is Owen Odell, is the name of the character. And Owen Odell is a storyteller. And he's telling the story to Now, in the book, it's a ghost listener that he creates using magic, but let's just say he's telling it to some young people. And he's telling the story of how he met Robin, or which in the language that this place is set is Rahibon, which means the person who was summoned, right? Please bear with me on this. It does actually become interesting, right? So Owen O'Dell is going to be played by Ben Whishaw, who is a really good actor, really soft-spoken young man. And I just like him, and loads of people like him. And the whole point of Owen O'Dell's character is that he's a likable dude because he's hanging out with Jarek Mace, who is an asshole, right? So you're first introduced to Jarek as he's breaking out of a window after having had an affair with a woman. He's undressed. He's got no clothes. He's got no boots on. He's dropping a sword everywhere because he's drunk. And then he gets attacked by a couple of dudes and he beats them up. And then Owen O'Dell is there with him and he goes to attack Owen O'Dell and he's like, no, don't attack me. And he runs off. And that's how you introduce to him. It's like, he's a shit character. He's not a nice guy. He just happens to be really good at killing people, right? And later on, it comes to the point where he starts robbing people. And he falls afoul of the local government, who is represented by a sheriff, right? Now, the sheriff, in this case here, I'm not sure who. He's meant to be an older man. Let's just say he's played by Russell Crowe, right? So Russell Crowe puts a hit out on this Jarek Mace because, let's just put it this way, he's dipped his wick in the wrong candle wax. And the sheriff is not happy, so he wants to have him killed. So he falls in with a character called Wolf, who's going to be played by Josh Brolin, who is effectively Little John. Now, he's not called Little John, he's just called Wolf, but he's the tough older guy who's running the outlaws, and then Robin comes in and joins in with them, becomes the head of them. He's played by Jarek Mace, right? So in this story, Jarek Mace starts leading these outlaws, and he's just robbing stuff for his own good. But all the poor people just assume they can take the money from him. So it's not that he's robbing the rich and giving to the poor. It's that he's getting mobbed by 700 and 800 poor people, and there's only 20 people in his band of merry men. So he kind of has to just let them take the money from him, right? And they're all like, oh, you're heroes. And he's like, fuck these people, we're going to have to sneak around. And that's why he sets up his camp in the woods and all this sort of stuff, right? So his thing, right? Now, how does he get to be Robin Hood? The story is actually set 300 years after when Robin Hood would have been around. And there is a character played by Helen Mirren called Horga, who is an old woman, and she comes and she meets Jarek Mace, and she says, at some stage you're going to meet me again, but I will look very different. And then some scenes happen, which I'm not going to go into details now because I give them too much away, but somebody comes from the past using magic and says, I'm looking for a great hero. And they take Jarek Mace back into the past, where he gets given the name Rahibon or Robin. And he then becomes the great hero that they've been telling stories about Robin Hood for the last 300 years. So this guy, Jarek Mace, who's been living in the present, is actually a guy who was back 300 years in the past. And he does all of the cool stuff that Robin Hood was, including fighting vampires.
As Robin Hood always does.
as Robin Hood did. And so I'm going to have the young Horga be played by Natalie Dormer. So, who I think looks like a young Helen Mirren. So it kind of evens out that if she's going to be an older Helen Mirren, that she's going to be a younger Natalie Dormer. So that's what my story is going to be. It's about how Robin Hood was an asshole who was only doing stuff for his own good, and that it turns out that he was actually from the future brought back into the past to fight vampires, which is the thing. And I swear to God, I'm not doing this book justice.
It sounds fascinating.
It's 290 pages long, I think. It's been a while since I read about it. In paperback, it's 290 pages long. It is one of the most cracking reads you're ever going to come across. Because the guy who wrote it, David Gemmell, he's very good at writing adventure stories. And this one here, it's like Dan Brown decided to sit down and write a fancy book. Like every chapter is 6 pages long and finishes on a little cliffhanger. So you have to read on to the next one. You have to read on to the next one. And it's just this cracking little novel that involves all this stuff. Also, Jarek Mace, Robin Hood, will be played by Michael Fassbender. So all of those characters I mentioned have, allegories. So Owen O'Dell's character is basically Friar Tuck. As I said, Josh Brolin is basically... So Josh Brolin is basically Little John. Natalie Dormer is basically Maid Marian, and the old lady is basically the hag from the other Robin Hood stories. There's always this like old woman who's like all this stuff. So the idea is that they're all interconnected stuff, and that's what I want to make. It's my last chance to do one of these probably, and that's what I would want to make as my version of a movie.
That sounds awesome, and hopefully one day you can come back on as my guest. And we can read that and talk about it.
I would love to. It sounds brilliant. Now we move on to our last section, which is where and I think this might be the first time we have a proper disagreement on this. Estimatio. Sarah, can I read out your final review of this without giving you the score?
Yes.
It just says, fuck this movie.
So I got very angry about historical inaccuracies, both deliberate and none, while writing out my notes for this movie. I will say, I believe in the concept of good, bad movies, to use the kind of Flophouse parlance I think I did before. And I wouldn't say don't watch this movie, but I would say watch this movie with a friend for the purpose of making fun of it. So, that said, I am actually going to slightly change my score from my original.
No.
Okay, so I was originally going to give this movie a 1 out of 5. I am going to up it to a 2 out of 5, to be perfectly honest, exclusively because I feel like it deserves to have a better rating than King Arthur Legend of the Sword, which as of last week I've had to move up to a 1 after rating Kingdom of Heaven as my 0. So to reflect the fact that if you had to watch one of these new Not My Daddy's Medieval movie, it should be this one. It's entertaining. It's bad. It's really bad, but it's entertaining. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. So a lot of points off for getting everything wrong, and also honestly being pretty mediocrely acted with the exception of Ben Mendelsohn kind of hamming it up. But it's going to get 1 extra point back for being kind of a good bad time.
Right. Now, I'm well known. So when Sarah references the Flophouse, just in case people don't remember, it's a movie podcast where 2 comedians and their good buddy who's a barman watch movies which are flops and then review them and talk about what they could have done better, etc. Right? So they describe movies as good bad movies, as in they're so bad that it's enjoyable to watch them and make fun of them. Right? Now, on my previous podcast, my other podcast, I've had one of the hosts of the Flophouse on and grilled him about the whole good bad concept, because if you are finding enjoyment in a movie, whether or not that's the way the movie intended you to enjoy it, then it's a movie you like. So I'm going to describe this as a movie I kind of like. It's terrible, right? So people listening, it's a terrible, terrible movie. The action scenes are muddled, which is something I complain about constantly in the other movies I give low scores to. The actors are really bad and give wooden performances, or they're given hammy performances. It's too dark. It's going for an allegory on the war on terror.
Such a choice.
And it's failing in so many places. But, and I can't say I didn't enjoy watching it even a little bit. It's fine. It's like in the hands of a better director with a more charismatic leading man. And do you know what? Even Taron Egerton isn't the worst, but it's just an okay movie. I was going to give it 2.5, and I went, you know what? I'm just going to give it a 3. This is a 3 out of 5 movie for me. It's a movie that's there. You'll throw it on. There's another podcast I like called We Hate Movies, or WHM, and they describe something as hangover movies. This is a hangover movie. Like, you could sit down, throw this on. You've had a few drinks on a Saturday night, and you throw this on a Sunday, and it's an hour and a half to 2 hours where you're like, I don't have to really engage my brain here. Stuff is happening on screen. I'm kind of enjoying what's going on. It's not going to kill me. So yeah, I'm going to give this a 3 out of 5. I'm not going to feel good about giving it a 3 out of 5, but I'm still going to give it, which brings its average to 2.5 out of 5, which is probably where it's at for me. Like, it's that bang in the middle. It's not the worst movie we've ever done. It's not a good movie, but it's not a truly, truly bad movie. Like, I would watch this 4 times before I'd watch Kingdom of Heaven again.
Yeah, agreed. I definitely watched this before Kingdom of Heaven. I would definitely watch this before King Arthur: Legend of the Sword. I will also
it's
say...
way better than Robin Hood.
Yeah, I will also say... with Marion, we definitely get some amount of the, like, modern feminists, like, look at her, like, rah, 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 she's a woman who could do everything men can do, which is, like, a thing that's kind of annoying, but honestly, after Kingdom of Heaven last week, like, fuck it, I'll take it. Like, at least she has some agency, like, at least it's not, like, it's not as depressing to watch, at least. Carm, stop.
Okay. Carmen, she's just having fun.
She is. She's having a lot of fun knocking things off the table.
Very,
very cat-like.
You're a cat. That's what you're there for. Sarah, would you like to talk to our
listeners? Yes. So, listeners.
Oh, your listeners now, not mine.
Yeah. So, listeners, you can find this podcast on Twitter at Media-eval Pod. You can find us on any podcatching platform. It would be great if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts /iTunes. 5-star reviews definitely also help us, get noticed, which is pretty great. Also, if you have any questions or feedback for us, please send us /me an email at media.evalpod@gmail.com. And we also now have a Facebook group, and I would love to see you there. It's a lot of fun. Ollie will still be in the Facebook group, I'm sure, and chatting every now and then.
Yeah, I'll still be banging around.
You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram and wherever else at Sarah If Ducker. Ollie, anywhere else on the internet that they can find you?
Yeah, well, normally what I do is I talk about Best Acquaintances, but Best Acquaintances is finished for roughly the same reason that I'm finishing up in Media-eval. Just in case people think that there's anything major going on. So my son is autistic, and I don't get to see him as much as I should, and just for various family reasons, whatever. But I'm going to be taking him for overnights, which is taking away half of my time, which is great. It's bad that I'm not going to have that. And then in the other evenings, I'm going to be studying and basically trying to become better at dealing with autism. So I'm going to do a master's in autistic studies, effectively. That's not what it's called, right? But I don't want to give the actual details about that because it's a little bit very specific that would, be talking about him, and I don't want to talk about his medical issues, whatever.
Yeah, of course.
So so I'm going to be basically practicing being a better father, which is just going to take up so much of my time that I'm not really going to have time to record and edit episodes. And I've loved doing Media-eval. It's great. Sarah's one of the, like, I say this a lot, that I kind of only really joined the whole internet thing in like 2015, and between Emily I do the other podcast with, and Sarah, they're two of the best friends that I've made in the last 15 years. So I've been delighted, and it's been an absolute pleasure doing these things with them. But just sometimes other stuff comes up and you just don't get the chance to do the kind of stuff that you want to do. But so Sarah, I just want to say that it's been absolutely brilliant recording with you, and you make it like I've said this from day one before we started the podcast, that you're the star of this podcast. So me leaving it is not going to make it any worse. And I'm sure whatever guest hosts you have on are going to do a great job of talking shit while you explain history to them.
Yeah, well, so first of all, also just Ollie, it's been really amazing to have you be a part of this. This podcast, I think, would not be what it is without having had you here for these first few months of Media-eval. You have been a completely amazing co-host. And I'll be very sad to see you go, but excited about all of the, things that you're going to be doing that make you really happy, and that's really great. And yeah, it's been really great having you here, and I hope to have you on as a guest in the future. But
are you going to replace me with a woman, Sarah? Because then that would be like gender swapping, like you do in all the movies.
So for the time being, I think probably the Media-eval will probably continue with being me and some guest co-hosts, and we will see where things go. So I hope you will all still stick with us.
Sweet.
Or stick with me as I continue this journey in watching mostly terrible medieval movies.
Guys, you know you're gonna stick with it. Sarah does most of the work in this podcast. You wouldn't believe, effectively I edit, and then everything else is done by Sarah. So, and then she's gonna have to learn how to edit.
I am gonna have to learn how to edit.
Yeah, and I can. But don't worry, I'll help you out with that. But anyway, listen, I don't want to talk too much because I'm going to get choked up and stuff. So, Sarah, it's been an absolute pleasure. And everybody who's listening, please keep listening.
Thank you.